The eviction notice was still clutched in his trembling hand when his 6-year-old daughter quietly asked whether they still had a home. At that exact moment, the man responsible for destroying his career drove past without recognizing the father he had broken. The answer that single dad Rowan Mercer gave his little girl changed the course of both their lives forever, because instead of surrendering to bitterness, he whispered that as long as they still had each other, they had enough to begin again. No one could have imagined that months later, the same executive who had stripped him of everything would unknowingly walk through the doors of a tiny, forgotten bakery that hope had rebuilt from the dust. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing community. Only a year earlier, Rowan Mercer had believed his life was finally becoming stable. He had spent nearly 14 years working for one of the largest food manufacturing companies in the region, slowly climbing from warehouse assistant to operations manager. He was never the loudest voice in the room or the most ambitious employee chasing titles. His co-workers respected him because he stayed late when someone needed help, remembered everyone's birthdays, and quietly solved problems without asking for recognition. His greatest motivation wasn't promotions or bonuses. Everything he did was for his daughter, Elsie, whose cheerful smile somehow made every exhausting day worthwhile. After losing his wife, Claire, to a sudden illness 3 years before, Rowan had promised himself that Elsie would never feel alone. Every school recital, every science fair, every bedtime story became sacred. She was his entire world. The company had recently appointed a new chief executive officer named Graham Holloway, a man celebrated by investors for increasing profits wherever he worked. Newspapers praised his efficiency, shareholders admired his ruthless business decisions, and employees feared the cold expression that rarely changed no matter who stood before him. Graham believed emotions had no place in business. Numbers mattered. People were replaceable. The restructuring began quietly before spreading through every department. Experienced workers disappeared from their desks overnight. Entire teams were eliminated. Rowan tried to reassure his nervous colleagues, believing honesty and years of loyal service would count for something. He couldn't have been more mistaken. One bright morning during a mandatory meeting, Rowan was informed that his position no longer existed. The explanation sounded polished and professional, but every carefully chosen word carried the same painful message. Loyalty had no value anymore. His access card was deactivated before he reached the parking lot. His personal belongings were packed into a cardboard box by someone who refused to make eye contact. As he walked toward his aging pickup truck, he noticed Graham leaving the building surrounded by advisors. Their eyes briefly met, but Graham looked through him as though Rowan were invisible. Finding another management position proved impossible. Companies were downsizing everywhere. Savings disappeared into rent, groceries, school supplies, and medical bills. Rowan sold his watch, then his fishing boat, then Claire's old piano with tears in his eyes because it had once filled their home with laughter. He skipped meals so Elsie never had to. He smiled through every hardship because children always notice more than parents believe. Eventually the apartment was gone too. The eviction happened on a beautiful sunny morning that felt strangely cruel. The birds still sang. Children still rode bicycles across the neighborhood. Life continued as though nothing heartbreaking had happened. Rowan packed everything they owned into the pickup truck. Elsie carefully carried a small box filled with photographs of her mother. She never complained. She simply asked whether memories could ever be taken away. Rowan hugged her tightly and promised they never could. For several weeks they stayed with an elderly neighbor named Harriet Caldwell, a retired schoolteacher whose own children lived thousands of miles away. Harriet insisted they occupy her spare room until Rowan found stability. She believed pride should never prevent someone from accepting kindness. Every afternoon she baked fresh bread simply because she knew its smell reminded Rowan of happier days. One afternoon Harriet mentioned an abandoned bakery sitting on the edge of a small downtown district. The owner had passed away months earlier, and nobody wanted the aging building. The ovens were outdated. The roof leaked. The windows were cracked. Most people saw a worthless property. Harriet smiled gently and told Rowan that broken things sometimes hide extraordinary futures. The idea refused to leave his mind. Using nearly every dollar remaining after selling his truck and borrowing a modest amount from a local credit union, Rowan purchased the neglected bakery. Friends quietly questioned his judgment. He had never owned a bakery. He wasn't a professional baker. The building looked beyond saving. But Rowan remembered the afternoons spent helping his grandmother make bread when he was a boy. He remembered Claire laughing whenever flour covered his face. Most importantly, he remembered Elsie saying the bakery smelled like hope even before it reopened. Every morning after sunrise, Rowan scrubbed floors, repaired shelves, painted faded walls, and learned recipes through endless trial and error. Harriet taught him family baking techniques she had collected over decades. Retired carpenter Nolan Briggs repaired tables without charging a penny. Teenagers from the neighborhood volunteered to repaint the storefront after school. Local gardeners planted colorful flowers outside. The little bakery slowly transformed into something warm and welcoming because an entire community believed one struggling father deserved another chance. The grand opening attracted only a handful of customers. Most bought a single loaf. A few returned the following day. Then they brought friends. People discovered that Rowan remembered every customer's name. Children received warm cinnamon rolls after finishing school. Elderly neighbors stayed for coffee because someone genuinely listened to their stories. Unsold bread was donated to shelters every afternoon instead of thrown away. The bakery became more than a business. It became a place where lonely people found conversation, grieving families found comfort, and struggling parents found understanding. Profits remained small, but happiness grew larger every day. Elsie proudly arranged pastries inside the display case after school, wearing an oversized apron that almost reached her shoes. Customers adored her bright smile. She reminded everyone that joy didn't require expensive decorations or fancy furniture. Sometimes it simply arrived carrying fresh cookies and asking how your day had been. Months later, local newspapers began writing about the remarkable bakery that was quietly changing lives through kindness rather than clever advertising. Photos of smiling volunteers, grateful customers, and shelves filled with homemade bread spread across social media. Rowan never expected attention. He only wanted to provide a stable home for his daughter. Meanwhile, Graham Holloway faced a completely different reality. The aggressive corporate decisions that had once impressed investors were beginning to unravel. Product quality declined after experienced employees were dismissed. Customer trust weakened. Financial reports no longer looked impressive. Board members questioned Graham's leadership. The confidence that once surrounded him slowly faded into constant pressure. One sunny afternoon Graham traveled through the same town for a business meeting. Heavy traffic forced his driver to take unfamiliar streets. Looking out the window, Graham noticed a crowd gathered outside a charming bakery with cheerful flower boxes and handwritten signs thanking customers for supporting local families. Curiosity overcame impatience. He decided to step inside while waiting for the meeting to begin. The moment Graham entered, the comforting aroma of fresh bread surrounded him. Laughter echoed softly across the dining area. Elderly couples shared pastries beside young parents helping toddlers decorate cookies. Volunteers packed extra bread for a homeless shelter. It felt less like a business and more like a family. Then Graham looked toward the counter. Behind it stood Rowan Mercer. Their eyes met again for the first time since the day of the dismissal. Recognition slowly appeared across Graham's face. Rowan felt old memories rushing back like an unexpected storm. The humiliation. The fear. The sleepless nights wondering how he would feed Elsie. The painful drive away from the company carrying a cardboard box containing 14 years of dedication. He could have turned Graham away. He could have embarrassed him. He could have finally enjoyed the revenge so many people secretly dream about. Instead, Rowan greeted him with the same quiet dignity that had survived every hardship. He personally served Graham a slice of apple pie and a cup of coffee. Customers nearby had no idea they were witnessing two lives unexpectedly colliding again. As Graham looked around the bakery, he noticed photographs covering one wall. They showed volunteers delivering bread to shelters, children learning to bake, elderly neighbors celebrating birthdays, and community fundraisers supporting families facing illness. Every picture reflected generosity instead of profit. A framed quote near the register caught his attention. It read that success means very little if no one smiles because of it. For reasons Graham couldn't explain, those simple words unsettled him more than any angry accusation ever could. He quietly asked Rowan how everything had happened. Rowan never mentioned revenge. He never listed the suffering. He simply explained that losing everything had forced him to discover who he really wanted to become. He admitted there had been mornings filled with fear, afternoons filled with uncertainty, and evenings where hope felt painfully distant. But every act of kindness from strangers reminded him that broken chapters don't have to become the final page of someone's story. Listening in silence, Graham realized something he had ignored for years. He had built profitable companies but left wounded people behind. Rowan had lost his career yet somehow built something infinitely richer. Before leaving, Graham noticed Elsie placing an extra muffin into a paper bag for an elderly customer. She whispered that everyone deserved a little surprise. The old woman smiled with tears shining in her eyes. That tiny moment stayed with Graham long after he walked outside. Over the following weeks, he returned several times, always during the daytime, never announcing who he was. He watched volunteers laughing while kneading dough together. He watched Rowan patiently teaching teenagers valuable job skills instead of criticizing mistakes. He watched customers comforting complete strangers over coffee. Eventually Graham asked whether he could volunteer one afternoon. The request surprised everyone, especially Rowan. Yet Rowan believed people could change if they truly wanted to. So Graham began washing dishes. No speeches. No publicity. No photographers. Just quiet service. For the first time in decades, he experienced work that wasn't measured by quarterly reports. He apologized sincerely to Rowan for treating dedicated employees like disposable numbers. He admitted his ambition had blinded him to the human cost of every decision. Rowan accepted the apology, not because the past disappeared, but because carrying bitterness any longer would only steal the happiness he had fought so hard to rebuild. Word quietly spread that the former executive had become one of the bakery's regular volunteers. Some people doubted his motives. Others believed redemption should always remain possible. Graham never defended himself. He simply continued showing up, stacking bread, cleaning tables, and delivering meals to families facing difficult times. Months later, after resigning from the corporation, Graham established a foundation helping displaced workers learn new careers through partnerships with small local businesses. The first business to participate was Rowan's Bakery, where unemployed parents received baking lessons, customer service training, and confidence that many thought they had permanently lost. The little bakery that almost nobody wanted became one of the town's brightest symbols of hope. Its greatest recipe was never flour, butter, or sugar. It was compassion. Visitors often assumed Rowan had always been successful because happiness surrounded the building. Few realized the strongest foundations are sometimes built from the deepest heartbreak. Before we reach the end of this story, take a moment to leave a meaningful comment and tell us what you believe is more powerful, forgiveness after betrayal or the courage to begin again after losing everything. Years after losing his career, Rowan no longer measured wealth by bank accounts or job titles. Every morning he unlocked the bakery doors with gratitude instead of anxiety. Elsie grew into a confident young girl whose kindness reflected the people who had helped raise her. Harriet watched proudly from her favorite corner table, smiling every time another stranger walked in carrying heavy burdens and left carrying fresh bread and renewed hope. Graham continued proving through quiet actions that even those who make painful mistakes can choose a better path when humility replaces pride. The bakery remained filled with sunlight, laughter, warm bread, and ordinary people discovering extraordinary hope in one another. Rowan had indeed lost everything, but in the process he found something no company could ever hire, fire, or take away again: a life built on compassion, purpose, family, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Together, our community can continue sharing stories that remind us kindness is never wasted, forgiveness is never weakness, and sometimes the greatest success begins the very day everything seems lost.